At my mother's birthday dinner, my sister stood smiling wide and announced to everyone she'd taken a $300,000 loan in my name. I'm Ellis Harrow, 52, an accountant who smelled hickory smoke from the BBQ pit while gripping my silver pocket watch, still smooth and shining under the chandelier. Ever had a family gathering turn into a public ambush? The hickory smoke drifting in from the back patio curled through Delora Harrow's house like a memory I couldn't shake, sweet, sharp, and heavy enough to stick in the folds of my jacket. The chandeliers above the dining room tables cast pools of amber light, glinting off the cut crystal glasses, clinking together as cousins toasted another of my mother's perfectly choreographed birthdays. I stood near the sideboard, fingers tight around the stem of a water glass, watching the silver pocket watch on my lapel catch a flash of light every time I shifted. It was my father's, the last thing of his I carried without shame, and that glint became my anchor in a room full of people pretending we were all one polished unit. Then, Isolde, wrapped in a designer dress that probably cost more than my annual property taxes, raised her glass and smiled wide enough for the caterer to notice. "Oh, and don't worry about the renovations," she announced, her tone honey-sweet, each word placed like a needle. "I've taken out a loan, $300,000, under Ellis's name, of course." Her smile never wavered, as if she'd just shared the weather forecast, instead of detonating a bomb in front of half of Savannah's golf club set. The room stilled for a half-breath. Forks, hovered wine glasses paused midair. Then came the ripple, soft laughs, low murmurs, eyes darting toward me like I was a curiosity at the edge of the exhibit. The chandelier light felt hotter on my neck. The pocket watch flashed again, drawing my eye just in time for Isolde's laughter to follow, lighter, sharper. "Honestly, Ellis," she said, tilting her head, "sell that old thing, and it might cover a month's interest." I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice to come out even. I let my fingers trace the cool, worn edge of the watch, the smoothness of its surface, grounding me as my jaw tightened. The condensation from my water glass ran down over my knuckles, cold and sticky, a better distraction than the stares I could feel along the length of the table. An uncle, great distant and probably tipsy, leaned toward his neighbor and muttered just loud enough to carry accountants. Boring, but dependable. I couldn't tell if it was a defense or an insult, but it landed somewhere between my ribs all the same, joining the rest of the quiet barbs that never quite healed. Dinner pressed on. The crystal glasses sang as they were lifted for another toast, the smell of barbecue from outside mingling with the perfume wafting off Delora's chair. My mother didn't look at me. Not once. She sipped her Chardonnay, lips-pursed eyes fixed on some point beyond the room, as though she might hold the whole evening together by refusing to acknowledge the cracks spreading through it. As the dessert plates clattered onto the table and a cousin's child shrieked with laughter from the hall, Isolde leaned in close enough that her perfume filled my lungs. Her voice was soft for me alone. "Relax, Ellis," she whispered, a playful pat on my wrist. "Boring men make the best guarantors. You'll thank me when it all works out." She pulled back before I could reply, turning her smile on Delora as though nothing had been said. By the time I slipped out into the driveway, the night air was thick and cool, carrying the faint hum of cicadas and the last whiff of charred hickory. My car sat under the glow of a single lamppost, its windshield fogging in the humid dark. I stood by the driver's door for a moment, phone in hand, staring at the blank screen before typing, "Need you to pull some files tonight. Loan under my name. Don't ask." I hit send to Trent Mallory without hesitation. Sliding into the driver's seat, I shut the door and let the muffled laughter from inside fade into nothing. The pocket watch ticked faintly in my jacket, steady but soft, like it was marking time for a storm no one else could hear. I ran my thumb across its face, once the cool metal calming my breath, and looked at the dark road stretching ahead. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a family prank or some careless stunt. Someone else was pulling strings, and I needed to know who before this quiet leak turned into a flood. The hum of the HVAC filled the empty corridors like a whisper. I couldn't unhear, each click and sigh of the vents louder than the echoes of my family's laughter from a few hours ago. The Harrow Night building always felt sterile after hours, but tonight it was worse hollow cold, as if the place knew I'd walked back in carrying more weight than a laptop bag could hold. I sat at my desk with my jacket still on, watching the way the desk lamp light caught a hairline crack in my coffee mug. It gleamed like a thin scar, and I wondered how long it would take before my father's pocket watch looked the same fractured one, careless slip from being another broken thing. Rain ticked softly against the windows along River Street, the sound interrupted by the occasional rattle of wind that made the glass quiver in its frame. The smell of copier toner from down the hall hung in the air oddly sharp against the damp scent of rain that snuck in whenever the front door opened. My hands trembled just enough around the chipped mug that I set it down before I dropped it. I didn't need another crack to stare at tonight. Trent Mallory leaned in the doorway, his denim jacket darkened at the shoulders, still damp from the drizzle outside. He held a thin folder against his chest like it might burn if he opened it too soon.
"You sure you want to see this?"
"No," he asked. His voice pitched low, a rough-edged kind of humor hiding underneath. He already knew I'd say yes. I gestured him in, fingers brushing the edge of the mug, feeling the uneven line along the ceramic. Trent laid the folder on the desk, flipping it open with a flat-palmed motion. Bank statements, rows of numbers printed clean and cold, spread out between us. He tapped a column with his pen. "Your sister's loan, the $300,000. Same amount shows up missing in the retirement fund. Same day, same hour." I leaned forward, the desk lamp catching on the slick paper, the faint chemical smell of fresh toner lingering. My eyes traced the numbers, my mind already running through the reconciliation steps that should have flagged this. Could it be a reporting lag? Some kind of reconciliation batch? I asked, though my voice lacked conviction. Trent shook his head, pulling another sheet from the folder, a printout of email logs. Check the timestamps. Half of these messages were sent after midnight on weekends, routed through a personal account tied to an address outside the company. This isn't sloppy accounting. It's deliberate. The rain against the windows grew steadier, each tap a counterpoint to the sound of pages shifting between us. I caught my reflection in the glass behind Trent, faint and distorted by the droplets streaking down the pane. The man staring back didn't look like someone with a seat at the family table. He looked like a ghost haunting his own office here, but fading easy to overlook. Trent broke the quiet.
"Ellis,"
he said, his tone firmer now. "If this isn't stopped, you're not just covering a loan. You're the fall guy for a retirement fund breach. They'll hang it on you, clean and neat, and you know Sterling will make it stick." I gathered the papers slowly, the static clinging to my fingers, edges sharp against my skin. The HVAC kicked on again, the low rumble filling the gap between us. Trent didn't push further. He just nodded once and slipped out his footsteps, fading down the hallway, leaving only the hum of the vents and the distant rain. I sat there long after he left, the fluorescent glow above, casting a sterile circle around me. On the monitor, a blank email draft blinked like a metronome. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I finally typed, "Rhodes, it's Ellis." I know it's been years, but I need your eyes. Things are unraveling. The cursor blinked at me, patient, almost expectant. I hit send. The crack in my mug caught the light one more time, as I leaned back and, for a second, it looked like a fissure running through the whole room. The rain softened to a whisper on the glass, the HVAC went still, and the building held its breath along with me. Rhodes slid into the booth across from me, the vinyl groaning under his weight, as though the seat had forgotten how to hold anyone. He didn't bother with pleasantries, not a handshake, not even a glance at the plate of pecan pie between us, untouched and slowly losing its shine under the neon flicker. The sign outside sputtered between pink and blue, throwing our faces into alternating shadows. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air, stubborn as the bacon grease that clung to the edges of the counter by the kitchen. His coat collar was turned up against the drizzle he'd walked through, darkening the shoulders of his wool jacket. Without a word, he reached across the table, tapping the silver pocket watch clipped to my jacket, with a finger worn rough from years of handling more ledgers than handshakes.
Keep it close,
he muttered, his voice low and sandpaper rough.
Might be the quiet witness we need before this is done.
The watch ticked faintly, its sound more felt than heard, syncing with the hum of the diner's fluorescent lights. It had been years since we'd spoken, since I watched him walk out of Harrow Night with a box under one arm, done with the corporate game. He'd become a lawyer after that by reputation, if not by charm, the kind of man people called when the numbers didn't lie, but someone was trying to. His eyes stayed on the plate between us as he poured himself a cup of coffee from the chipped carafe. Steam rose in thin curls, catching the neon glow disappearing before it reached the ceiling.
Tell me,
he said, finally lifting the cup. How deep is the hole?
This time.
I slid the folder of statements and email logs across the table, my coat still damp, leaving a faint ring of water where my sleeve brushed the formica. 300,000, I said, keeping my voice level. Loan in my name, timed perfectly with a gap in the retirement fund. Trent pulled the timestamps. Half the emails were sent on weekends, routed through a personal account.
Someone's building a case to hang this on me.
Rhodes flipped through the papers, his calloused thumb leaving a smudge on the laminated menu as he studied the stack. Preserve everything, he said without looking up. Print and notarize copies. Back up every video feed you can get your hands on, 2 drives, different locations. And stop storing anything in the company system. Sterling's slick but predictable. He'll poke first, get you to flinch, make it look like you're scrambling. Don't give him that satisfaction. Outside, a gust of winter wind rattled the diner's door. I tightened my coat, the chill still clinging to the fabric. Rhodes leaned back, the booth creaking again, his gaze finally settling on me.
If this goes to court,
he said flatly, voice carrying over the low hiss of bacon on the grill.
I'll stand with you. Testify, file motions, whatever it takes. But...
His pause was deliberate, his eyes steady on mine.
You need to stop hoping they'll love you for it. That's not the fight you're in anymore.
The words landed heavier than I expected. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee, curling and fading like something I couldn't quite hold on to. My hand brushed the pocket watch, feeling the cold metal against my fingertips. Each tick a reminder of how little room there was for nostalgia now. I nodded once, a silent pact, and extended my hand across the table. Rhodes clasped it firmly, no words, no theatrics. The deal was sealed over cold coffee and a flickering neon glow. As we stood to leave, my phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with Isolde's name like a warning flare.
Stop digging. Or, next Thanksgiving you won't even have a chair to lose.
The neon blinked pink, then blue across the message. I stared at it for a beat, thumb hovering over the screen, then slid the phone back into my pocket without typing a word. The drizzle had turned to a fine mist outside, coating the asphalt in a slick sheen. Rhodes walked beside me without speaking, his breath visible in the cold. The diner's neon glow faded behind us, replaced by the soft tick of the watch in my coat, its rhythm steady against the shifting quiet of the night. The glass walls of the conference room reflected every flicker of light, every twitch of expression, making the space feel more like a stage than a meeting. Sterling stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, one hand resting on a stack of papers, the other clicking a sleek remote. The monitor behind him came alive with a grainy clip, the kind of security footage meant for routine reviews, now spliced and edited into a damning reel. On screen, I hovered over a desk, flipping through files, sliding something into my jacket pocket, cut abruptly before the part where everything was returned. Without the missing seconds, it looked like theft. Sterling let the silence stretch, his profile lit by the faint glow of the footage, before his voice cut through.
"Ladies and gentlemen,"
he began, smooth and deliberate,
"this is the behavior of someone breaching fiduciary duty."
The hum of the fluorescent lights above felt louder than his words, a droning counterpoint to the soft patter of the storm outside. A faint scent of fresh toner lingered from the printers in the hall, mingling with the damp musk of wet coats hung on the stand by the door. I stood near my chair, fingers loose at my sides, my gaze fixed on Sterling, not the screen. My pocket watch clipped inside my jacket shifted as I moved to sit. It slipped from its chain and hit the floor with a muted clink, the crack of its glass distinct to me, even over the buzz of the lights. No one else seemed to notice the sound, but it lodged itself in my chest like a warning bell. Isolde poised 2 seats down, tilted her head ever so slightly, her pearl earrings catching the overhead light. Her voice came soft, almost tender.
"Ellis, maybe this isn't malice. Maybe it's a cry for help. You've been under strain. We worry about you."
Her words dripped with faux sympathy, every syllable designed for the room, not for me. Delora didn't speak at all, simply raised her bottle of sparkling water in a languid sip, her eyes half-lidded, as though watching a play she already knew the ending to. Sterling pressed the remote again, pausing the footage at a still frame of my hand in a drawer.
"The board deserves clarity,"
he said, his gaze sweeping the room, catching on each director in turn.
"This isn't about family. It's about integrity. And about the company's future."
His tone carried that measured gravity he used when he wanted the audience to think they were making their own conclusions. I crouched just long enough to pick up the watch, feeling the sharp ridge where the glass had fractured, its once smooth face now rasped against my fingertip as I slipped it into my pocket. I didn't bother defending myself. No arguments, no outbursts. Just silence, a steady, deliberate quiet that felt heavier than any denial. Across the room, Rhodes leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He didn't intervene, didn't so much as shift his stance. But when my phone buzzed against the tabletop, I slid it open under my palm. A single line from him.
"We've got the originals. Let them finish."
The storm outside intensified, rain slashing against the broad windows, with a sound like static drowning out the muted murmurs as Sterling clicked the screen dark and gathered his notes. The directors rose, some whispering to each other, others pointedly avoiding my eyes. The meeting dissolved into the shuffle of papers, the rustle of coats, and the faint squeak of shoes on polished floors. I stayed seated until the last person left. Then, I rose, the fluorescent hum and the distant thunder filling the space like twin heartbeats. The hallway beyond the glass felt colder, the air carrying the chill of the storm, seeping in through unseen cracks. I slipped my hand into my pocket, feeling the weight of the watch settle in my palm, its tick slower now, softer, as though it too had felt the impact of Sterling's show. Outside the window, the summer rain had turned into a relentless downpour streams, running along the glass like veins. I stared at the blurred city lights beyond the fractured watch, pressing into my hand, and exhaled a long, steady breath. Retreat wasn't an option anymore. The only sound in the courtroom was Rhodes's voice, low and gravelly, carrying each word like a verdict. He stood in the well, his square shoulders framed by the dark oak panels behind him, reading from a letter that looked as fragile as dried leaves. The October air seeped through the tall windows, cool against the warmth of too many bodies pressed into the gallery. From the corner, Delora's perfume, a sharp floral note, lingered like a deliberate distraction, just sweet enough to coat the tension. I sat at the table, posture straight, hands folded over a legal pad I hadn't written a word on. The cracked pocket watch rested in my coat pocket, ticking in a slow, uneven rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest. Every so often I felt the rough edge of its fractured glass under my fingertips when I shifted, a reminder that I wasn't whole yet. But I was still here. To my son, Ellis Harrow Rhodes continued his tone, steady, as he read. I leave the Kingston Drive house, and a share of my trust, not as a gesture of pity, but as acknowledgement of his dedication to this family and to the company he helped steady in my absence. His eyes flicked to me as he let the words hang in the air. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom, a rising tide of whispers and rustling programs. Sterling shifted in his seat beside Isolde. He leaned forward, one manicured finger tracing a line on his notes like he was scoring a play.
Objection to the inclusion of this document. Your Honor,
he said smoothly, voice practiced on the grounds of authenticity.
We have no way to verify its origin or timeline.
Rhodes didn't so much as look at him. He pulled another envelope from his worn leather folder, sliding it across the judge's bench, with the care of a man presenting a relic. Notarized, he said simply. Metadata chain verified by a third party. You'll find the timestamp precedes General Harrow's hospitalization by 3 months, and the letter remained sealed until retrieved by me as executor's counsel. The judge adjusted his glasses, brows knitting, as he flipped through the packet. The leather chair beneath him creaked as he leaned back, the weight of the moment audible in the strained springs. After a beat, he nodded once, admitted into evidence. A collective exhale moved through the room, though not from Isolde. Her fingers tightened around the sleek black pen in her hand, knuckles pale. She kept her expression smooth, but her eyes darted to Sterling, who gave the smallest shake of his head, his own composure fraying around the edges. I watched them both, not with triumph, but with a quiet stillness that felt steadier than any victory speech. Rhodes folded the original letter carefully, the ink bleeding slightly at the creases where age had softened the paper. He turned toward me, his gaze meeting mine, as he stepped back to the defense table.
Your father may not have hugged you,
he said, his voice pitched low enough for only me to hear, but he saw you. Something in my chest loosened, not relief exactly, but the release of a knot I hadn't realized was cutting that deep. The pocket watch ticked faintly, as if the uneven rhythm had steadied just a fraction. I breathed in the scent of old oak and fading cologne, felt the chill from the window brush across the back of my neck, and let the sound of murmurs fill the space where words would have failed me. Court adjourned with the bang of the gavel sharper than I expected. The shuffle of shoes and low chatter filled the space as we filed out into the marble hallway. The cool air outside the courtroom felt cleaner, freer. Rhodes walked beside me. His stride measured his hand still on the worn folder, like a sentinel guarding the truth we'd just placed on record. At the steps, he leaned in just enough for me to hear him over the murmurs and the echo of heels on tile. Now, he set his tone, as even as it had been all morning, we wait for the nail in their coffin. Audrey's arriving tomorrow. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The words alone carried the weight of a hammer poised above a crack. I glanced toward the courthouse doors, the late afternoon light spilling through the glass in sharp beams, dust motes drifting like slow-motion confetti. The watch in my pocket thumped once more against my chest, uneven but steady as we stepped out into the cool Savannah air. Tomorrow would bring the real reckoning. Audrey Lee's heels clicked once, twice, then stopped as she reached the witness stand. Her hands trembled, but she didn't waver as she held up two things that changed everything: a printed check with its edges worn soft from handling and a signed affidavit that bore the weight of weeks spent deciding whether to speak. Her voice shook on the first syllable, but steadied as she met the judge's gaze. "This," she said, holding the check where the gallery could see was given to me by Isolde Harrow Knight. $25,000. 2 days after General Harrow's death. The condition was simple: delete a video file that shows her impersonating Ellis Harrow. I didn't cache it. I didn't delete the file. The courtroom, heavy with the warmth of overworked heaters and the soft hum of legal pads flipping, went utterly silent. The bare magnolia branches outside rattled faintly in the January wind, their sound muffled by the thick glass, but still present, like nature tapping its own gavel. I sat at the defense table, back straight breath, even my fingers grazing the fractured glass of my father's pocket watch in my coat pocket. The crack caught my thumb, a ridge that felt like a scar. It's time to fix things for real, I thought, feeling its uneven tick steady itself against my pulse. Sterling was already on his feet, his composure frayed at the edges. "Your Honor, this is a personal transaction unrelated to the estate proceedings. The check is meaningless without context. Overruled," the judge said, his stone-set expression breaking only to glance at Audrey. "Proceed." Audrey handed the affidavit and the check to the clerk, her fingers marked with faint streaks of red ink from the notes she'd scrawled over the past week. Rhodes rose from his seat, calm and deliberate, and queued up the file on the court screen. The heaters clicked off, leaving only the faint scrape of a pen from somewhere in the gallery and the soft hiss of the speakers as the footage began to play. The video filled the screen in shaky detail, Isolde seated at a polished desk, signing a set of documents in looping strokes, each line ending with my name. The timestamp glowed in the corner, placing her in Savannah on a date she had sworn under oath she was in Atlanta, attending a foundation board meeting. The angle shifted to a second camera, showing Sterling hovering near the doorway, his watchful gaze unmistakable. The murmurs began as whispers, then grew louder, like a wave breaking. I didn't turn to see the faces behind me. I kept my eyes on the screen, my hands folded the weight of the cracked watch, grounding me as the truth unraveled, frame by frame. Isolde's fingers twitched on the table in front of her nails, tapping once, twice, before she stilled them. Sterling fumbled with his papers, his usual polish stripped away as he tried to rise again.
"Your Honor."
The judge's gaze cut him off with the efficiency of a slammed door.
Sit down, Mr. Sterling.
The magnolia branches outside scratched faintly against the glass, the sound punctuating each word like an exclamation mark. When the footage ended, Rhodes stepped into the well, his voice level but firm. Between this authenticated video, the notarized letter you accepted yesterday, and the corroborating metadata, there is no ambiguity. Isolde Harrow Knight orchestrated a fraudulent narrative to strip Ellis Harrow of his rightful inheritance and reputation. The judge didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, hands folded over the bench.
This court rules,
he said, his voice echoing off the oak-paneled walls, that Mr. Harrow's inheritance is hereby restored in full. All claims of fraud or incompetence are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the conduct of Ms. Harrow Knight and Mr. Sterling will be referred to the appropriate authorities for review. The gavel struck once sharp and final, the sound carrying like a crack of winter ice. Isolde didn't speak. She rose, her pearl bracelet rattling faintly as she adjusted her sleeve, and walked out with her head high, but her pace quick, her mask of composure stretched thin. Sterling followed, his papers clutched in a shaking hand, his gaze fixed anywhere but toward the bench. I stayed seated a moment longer, feeling the tension ebb from my shoulders. The heaters hummed back to life, filling the room with a low, steady warmth. I stood slowly, the cracked watch in my pocket, ticking a little stronger now, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. Outside, the January air hit cold and sharp, the kind that clears your lungs and stings your fingertips. The magnolia branches above the courthouse entrance swayed in the wind, their bare limbs rattling like bones, their movement soft against the gray sky. I reached into my coat and pulled out the watch, turning it so the fractured glass caught the pale light. The uneven tick felt steadier than it had in months. "Let's get you cleaned up," I murmured into the cold, the words slipping into the wind like a vow. I tucked the watch back into my pocket and started down the courthouse steps, the faint echo of the gavel still ringing somewhere deep in my chest. Isolde's voice poured through the phone like syrup, thick and too sweet to swallow. "Come to the gala, Ellis," she cooed, her tone balanced on the edge of command and coaxing. "We'll show them we're still united. Everyone will see that nothing's changed." Her words slid into the quiet of my home office like smoke, cloying and persistent. The spring breeze coming through the open window stirred the papers on my desk, carrying with it the faint scent of cut grass and the distant sound of sparrows chattering in the oaks outside. The ticking of my father's pocket watch smooth glass hole again steadied me as I stared at the phone on speaker. Its rhythmic click under my thumb felt like a metronome, keeping me anchored, a soft counterpoint to my sister's rehearsed tone. "No, Isolde," I said evenly, my voice calm enough that I could hear the breeze ruffle my words before they left the room. "We aren't united. Not anymore. Families don't erase each other, then smile for cameras like nothing happened." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clean, like a curtain falling between us. Her sigh crackled through the speaker, sharp and deliberate. "You're being dramatic," she said. That practiced little laugh slipping in, as though we were still children bickering over who got the bigger slice of birthday cake. "People will move on if you just—" I ended the call before she could finish the click of the disconnect, punctuated by the faint thud of a sparrow landing on the sill outside. The breeze pushed into the room a little harder, lifting the edges of a folder on my desk until it slapped lightly against my coffee mug. Moments later, a knock sounded at the doorframe, followed by Rhodes's steady footsteps. He carried 2 coffees in paper cups and a manila envelope under his arm. The rich, bitter scent of the coffee cut through the lingering sweetness of Isolde's voice, still hanging in my head. He set a cup beside me, the ceramic clink ringing softly as I poured it into my mug and placed the envelope on the desk. "I assume that was her," he said, his voice as gruff as ever. "Trying to polish the family silver again." "She wanted me at the gala," I replied, glancing at the papers he'd brought. "To pretend none of it ever happened, like a prop in one of their perfect photos." Rhodes didn't answer right away. He slid the envelope toward me, his fingers tapping once on the flap. "Forget their photos. You've got work to do. The paperwork's ready. If you're serious about the fund, we can get it launched by summer." I opened the envelope and scanned the documents, the legal phrasing dry but grounding. "The Quiet Ledger," I murmured, testing the name we'd settled on last week. It felt right. Quiet, steady, built for more than show. "It's not about revenge," I added, glancing at Rhodes, "but maybe it is a little. The best revenge is to make sure no one else ever gets erased the way I almost was." Rhodes nodded, lifting his coffee. "Then let's build it, and let them host their galas while we do something that actually matters." The breeze softened the sparrows outside, shifting to a gentler chorus as the afternoon light stretched across the hardwood floor. I set my mug down, the faint ceramic thud echoing in the stillness, and reached into the bottom drawer of my desk. My fingers closed around 2 things I hadn't touched in years: my father's old calculator, its buttons worn smooth, and a weathered ledger pad, its pages yellowed but blank. I placed them on the desk side by side, the watch ticking steadily beside them. I ran a thumb along the edge of the ledger and took a slow breath, the quiet filling the room like a promise. The call was over. The ledger was open. And for the first time in years, the numbers I was about to write down were my own. The scissors gave a soft metallic snip, and the ribbon fluttered to the ground like a slow exhale. The small crowd outside the new community center clapped gently, a polite ripple of sound rather than a cheer, the kind of acknowledgement that feels earned rather than staged. The July air hung heavy around us, warm and wet, the scent of fresh paint and blooming magnolia riding on each breath. A tray of sweating lemonade glasses glinted in the sunlight near the entrance, the condensation dripping onto the wood table and forming tiny circles that would dry into faint halos by the afternoon. Inside the main hall smelled faintly of sawdust, still lingering beneath the cleaner notes of citrus polish. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, cutting through the haze of newness. At the far wall beneath a spotlight, a glass case held the 2 things that anchored this day. My father's repaired pocket watch, its surface smooth again, ticking softly, and a framed photo of him. No stars, no pressed uniform, just a man laughing a fishing line trailing into the Savannah River beside me at age 10. People lingered near the display, some tilting their heads as they read the small plaque. When someone finally asked about the watch, I offered the same quiet answer I'd practiced. It kept time through a storm, so I figured it should keep going here too. They nodded, more thoughtful than curious, before moving along to the sign-up tables, where Rhodes and Trent were juggling clipboards and flyers. Rhodes, still in his usual rolled-up sleeves, despite the heat, barked instructions to a volunteer about adjusting the projector in the side room. His voice, gruff as ever, carried over the chatter. "Make sure the bookkeeping handouts are stacked by the door. These folks came to learn, not fumble through missing pages." Trent, balancing a box of cords, shot me a grin as he passed. "Feels more alive than any boardroom we've been in, doesn't it?" By midday, The lists were filling fast. Local veterans, retirees, and tradespeople signed up for workshops in basic bookkeeping, small business cash flow, even a session on auditing for nonprofit boards. Mrs. Cole, my old neighbor, shuffled up with her teenage nephew in tow, her wide-brimmed hat tilted against the sun.
Ellis, she said, her voice warm. Despite the heat, you've made something that matters. This'll help more people than you know.
She handed me a small bag of tomatoes from her garden, her unspoken way of sealing the compliment. Later, when the crowd thinned and the last of the lemonade glasses sat sweating in shallow rings, I stepped outside beneath the magnolia tree at the edge of the property. Its white blossoms had opened wide, their sweet scent lifting in the faint afternoon breeze, mingling with the distant hum of cicadas. I stood alone, the cool condensation from my glass sliding over my fingers as I tilted it toward the ground and let out a quiet breath. "It's mine now," I said aloud, though no one was near enough to hear. The magnolia branches stirred gently overhead, scattering a few petals onto the grass. I took another sip, the tart sweetness of the lemonade cutting through the heavy air. "And it's enough." From behind me, a voice broke the stillness. One of the younger men from the bookkeeping workshop, his face still a little flushed from the heat, held up a worn hardcover.
"Mr. Harrow," he asked, cautiously, "could I borrow this?"
"You had it on the shelf inside." I turned, catching the light of the sun off the magnolia's leaves, and nodded. "Take it," I said, handing over the book with a small, honest smile. "And when you're done, tell me what you learned." The tree rustled softly as he walked back toward the center, and the steady ticking of the watch inside the hall seemed to echo faintly through the open door. For the first time in years, the quiet around me didn't feel like isolation. It felt like the kind of silence you can build something on. Under the soft glow of the center's porch light, I paused by the display case, where my father's watch now ticked smoothly. No cracks, its sound blending with the distant hum of cicadas. Standing there, I realized justice wasn't just about winning back a house or clearing a name. It was about finding a rhythm of my own after years of static. Sometimes bridges collapse, so we can learn which ones are worth rebuilding. For anyone facing a loss, a betrayal, or a clean break, there's a quiet strength in creating something new instead of chasing what's gone. "Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise?"